Imagine standing on a flat, sun-baked plain in what is now southern Iraq. The year, as closely as we can fix it, is somewhere around 2450 BC. The air shimmers with heat. The soil beneath your feet is the most valuable thing in the world. Irrigated farmland, fed by canals branching off the Tigris, capable of feeding tens of thousands of people. And right now, an army is marching across it. They move in a formation no one on Earth has ever seen before. Shoulder to shoulder, rank after rank. The front line carries broad rectangular shields, copper-studded leather, tall enough to cover a man from chin to knee. From between those shields, bronze-tipped spears project outward like the quills of some enormous creature. Behind the shield wall, 6 rows of soldiers press forward, their weight driving the formation ahead like a single organism. At the head of this column, riding a war cart pulled by 4 onagers, stands a man named Enatum. He is the ruler of the city-state of Lagash, and he is about to fight a battle over a strip of farmland that will produce the oldest known monument to military victory in human history. This is where our story begins, not with the battle itself, but with the question it forces us to ask. How did we get here? How did a species that spent hundreds of thousands of years in small nomadic bands learn to organize itself into ranks, pick up weapons forged from metal, and march in lockstep to kill strangers it had never met? This is the Long War, and this is its first chapter. Welcome to The Long War, a documentary series that tells the story of human conflict as one continuous narrative, from the first organized armies to the present day. Every episode is a chapter. Every chapter connects to the one before it and the one after. The argument of this series is simple and uncomfortable. We are one species, and we have been at war with ourselves for as long as we have had the means to organize violence. This is not a show about glorifying war. It is a show about understanding it, about tracing the thread that connects a Sumerian spearman standing in a phalanx on the banks of the Tigris to an operator flying a drone over a desert 5,000 years later. That thread exists, and following it is the only way to understand how we arrived at the world we live in today. So let us begin at the beginning, in the land between 2 rivers, where civilization and organized warfare were born in the same soil at the same time for the same reasons. Southern Mesopotamia, the land the ancient Sumerians called Ki-Engi, the place of the civilized lords. It sits between the Tigris and the Euphrates, 2 rivers that flood unpredictably, depositing rich silt across a flat alluvial plain. It is brutally hot. It rains almost never. And yet, through an extraordinary feat of collective engineering, the people who settled here turned it into one of the most productive agricultural zones in the ancient world. They did this with canals, thousands of them, an intricate network of irrigation channels that diverted river water across the plain, transforming arid soil into fields of barley, wheat, and dates. By the 4th millennium BC, this system was supporting some of the largest concentrations of human population on Earth. The city of Uruk may have held between 40 and 50,000 people, a staggering number for its time. As the historian Nicholas Postgate has noted, the irrigation-based economy of southern Mesopotamia created a fundamental dependency. Every community's survival rested on access to water, and that access could be controlled, diverted, or destroyed by a neighbor. This is the key to understanding why organized warfare began here. Not because Sumerians were uniquely violent, but because they were uniquely dependent on infrastructure that was shared, contested, and vulnerable. When your fields rely on a canal that runs through your neighbor's territory, diplomacy has a shelf life. And when diplomacy fails, you need something new. You need soldiers. The Sumerian response to this pressure was the city-state, a walled urban center surrounded by satellite villages and farmland, governed by a centralized administration that controlled the redistribution of resources. By roughly 3000 BC, southern Mesopotamia contained more than a dozen of these city-states, including Ur, Uruk, Eridu, Lagash, Umma, Nippur, and Kish. Each was independent, each was walled, and each maintained what the archaeologist William Hamblin describes as a military system that included fortifications, logistics chains, armies with specialized units, and weapons production. A remarkable level of organization for any period, let alone the dawn of recorded history. But these were not professional soldiers. Not yet. The earliest Sumerian armies were composed of corvée labor, citizens conscripted for military service the same way they were conscripted for canal maintenance or temple construction. Farmers who picked up spears when the city needed them and put them down again when the crisis passed. And so the stage was set. A dozen independent city-states, each dependent on the same finite water supply, each armed, each walled, each convinced that the gods had granted their city dominion over the disputed farmland in between. The geography of Mesopotamia, as the scholar Stephen Bertman wrote, made warfare a natural condition of life. The only question was how violent it would become. The oldest armed conflict for which we have detailed evidence centers on a strip of fertile land called the Gu Edin, the edge of the plain. It lay between two city-states, Lagash to the southeast and Umma to the northwest. Both cities depended on this land for grain production. Both claimed divine right to it, and for more than a century they fought over it. The dispute had roots stretching back generations. Sometime around 2550 BC, a king named Mesilim of Kish, who held a kind of ceremonial authority over the other Sumerian city-states, had attempted to arbitrate. He set up a boundary stele, a stone marker, to define where Lagash's territory ended and Umma's began. The scholar Gerald Cooper, in his detailed reconstruction of this conflict, has shown that these arrangements broke down repeatedly. Umma accumulated debts. Lagash accused Umma of encroaching on its canals. Umma accused Lagash of choking off its water supply. The boundary stele was torn down and re-erected multiple times. By the reign of Eannatum, the situation had reached a breaking point. The ruler of Umma, a man named Ush, had committed what the inscriptions call aggressive acts against Lagash's territory, pressing into the Gu Edin and disrupting the irrigation canals that fed Lagash's fields. For a Sumerian city-state, this was not merely an insult. It was an existential threat. Without water, the fields died. Without fields, the people starved. Eannatum's response was military, and it was devastating. He personally led the army of Lagash against Umma in what became the first battle in history documented in enough detail for us to reconstruct its basic shape. The primary source is a limestone monument known today as the Stele of the Vultures, carved to commemorate Lagash's victory. It was discovered in fragments at the archaeological site of Tello in the 1880s by the French archaeologist Ernest de Sarzec, and is now housed in the Louvre. It is the first significant pictorial representation of warfare in the ancient world. What the stele shows is extraordinary. On its historical face, divided into 4 horizontal registers, we see Ionatum leading his army in a formation that has stunned military historians. The soldiers march in tight ranks, shoulder to shoulder, the front line carrying large rectangular shields with spears projecting between them. They wear copper helmets. They are organized at least 6 files deep. This is not a mob. This is a trained, uniformed, coordinated military unit. Beneath the marching soldiers, the bodies of the enemy dead are trampled underfoot. Above them, the stele's namesake, vultures circling with severed heads and limbs clutched in their beaks. It is a scene of controlled, organized violence, and of its consequences rendered without flinching. The inscription tells us that Umma suffered catastrophic losses. One passage records that 3,600 corpses of Umma's soldiers lay on the field. Ush, the king of Umma, was killed, not in the battle itself, but in a subsequent rebellion in his own capital, a detail that suggests the defeat destabilized his entire regime. But here is what matters most, and it is the first instance of a pattern that will repeat across every chapter of the Long War. The victory did not hold. Within a generation, Umma would encroach again. The canals would be contested again. The boundary steles would be torn down again. Ionatum's own inscriptions, boastful as they are, carry a note of exhaustion. And when he died, his empire began to fragment almost immediately. To understand what Sumerian warfare looked and felt like at ground level, we turn to an artifact that rivals the stele of the Vultures in importance, the Standard of Discovered in the 1920s by the British archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley during his excavation of the Royal Cemetery at a joint expedition of the British Museum and the University of Pennsylvania Museum, the Standard is a small, elaborately decorated box measuring roughly 22 centimeters high and 50 centimeters long. It is inlaid with a mosaic of shell, red limestone, and lapis lazuli, the deep blue stone that had to be imported from as far away as modern Afghanistan, a detail that speaks to the extraordinary reach of Sumerian trade networks. One face of the Standard depicts what scholars call the war panel. Read from bottom to top, it tells the story of a military campaign in 3 registers. The lowest shows 4 war carts, heavy, solid-wheeled vehicles, each pulled by a team of 4 onagers and crewed by a driver and a warrior armed with spears or axes. These are among the earliest depictions of wheeled military vehicles in human history. In the second register, infantry soldiers march in formation. The scene transitions into combat, with enemies being struck down and led away as prisoners. At the top, captives are paraded before a large central figure, almost certainly the king. The reverse face, the peace panel, shows the fruits of victory, a banquet, with the king and his court seated, drinking, attended by musicians and servants, while a procession of workers brings animals, fish, and goods as tribute. But the Standard is not just an artwork. It was found in a tomb, and what Woolley uncovered in the Royal Cemetery of remains one of the most haunting discoveries in archaeology. 16 of the roughly 2,000 burials were identified as royal graves, distinguished by their elaborate tomb chambers and by something deeply unsettling, the presence of dozens of additional bodies buried alongside the primary occupant. One grave, which Woolley called the Great Death Pit, contained 74 sacrificed attendants, 68 women and 6 men. The women wore golden headdresses and elaborate jewellery. The men were armed as soldiers. Recent analysis of skulls from the cemetery has revealed evidence of blunt force trauma before death, suggesting the attendants may have been struck unconscious before burial, raising complex questions about the nature of their consent. The Standard of Ur places war at the centre of Sumerian royal identity. The king is defined by his capacity for organised violence and by the prosperity that violence secures. War and peace are not opposites on this object. They are cause and effect. For roughly 700 years, the city-states of Sumer fought each other in cycles of conquest, rebellion, and reconquest. Kings rose, claimed dominion, and fell. Boundaries were drawn and erased. The fundamental pattern held. No single city could maintain control over the others for long. Then, around 2334 BC, a man who called himself Sargon changed everything. His origin story, preserved in a text known as the Legend of Sargon, reads like mythology. His mother was a priestess, possibly a temple servant of the goddess Ishtar, who was forbidden to raise a child. She placed the infant in a basket of rushes, sealed it with tar, and set it adrift on the Euphrates River. A man named Aki, a gardener in the service of the king of Kish, found the child and raised him as his own. From this beginning, Sargon rose to become cupbearer to Ur-Zababa, king of Kish, a position of considerable trust and proximity to power. What happened next is less clear. The historical record suggests Sargon seized the throne, possibly by force, and then founded a new capital city called Akkad, whose exact location has never been found. From this base, he launched a campaign of conquest that, over roughly 50 years, would bring every city-state in Mesopotamia under his control and extend his empire westward to the Mediterranean. What made Sargon different was not just ambition, it was method. He created what historians recognize as the first standing army in recorded history. An inscription states that 5,400 men ate bread daily before him, a permanent military force, fed and maintained by the state, available for deployment at any time. This was a revolutionary departure from the Sumerian model of citizen conscripts. Sargon's soldiers were professionals. Their livelihood depended entirely on his success, and he innovated tactically. The Akkadian army introduced a critical new element: large units of archers equipped with the composite bow. Constructed from laminated layers of wood, horn, and sinew, it had significantly greater range and penetrating power than the simple bow. It transformed the battlefield. Massed archers could neutralize war carts with a rain of missiles at distance, and they could devastate infantry formations before the two sides ever made contact. Sargon fought no fewer than 34 military campaigns. He defeated Lugal-Zaggesi of Uruk and brought him to the gate of the temple of Enlil in Nippur in a neckstock, a public humiliation designed to demonstrate that the old order was over. He also appointed his daughter, Enheduanna, as high priestess of the moon god Nanna at Ur. Enheduanna is notable in her own right. She is the earliest author in human history whose name we know, having composed a series of hymns to the goddess Inanna that survive to this day. Sargon built the first multinational empire. He standardized weights and measures. He built roads between cities. He created what may have been the world's first postal system, and he did all of it through the instrument of a professional military machine answerable to him alone. He died around 2279 BC, after a reign of 56 years. His empire would survive him by roughly a century before collapsing under internal revolts and external invasions. But the precedent was set. After Sargon, every ruler in Mesopotamia, and eventually every ruler in the Western world, would measure their ambitions against his. The age of the city-state skirmish was over. The age of empire had begun.